Welcome everyone to our free Pay It Forward Mercury retrograde. As you can see on your screen, we have Mercury retrograde coming up here in a week or so, September 9th to October 2nd, Mercury retrograde from 9 Libra back to 24 Virgo. And so as we get started, here's my housekeeping slide. For those of you who are new to listening to our Mercury retrograde webinars, several of the slides are going to be repeat slides that we do every Mercury retrograde. I'm going to go through those a little fast, and then I'll slow down when I have information that is to this specific Mercury retrograde. So as you can see on your screen, here's all the pertinent dates from the time Mercury goes into its pre-shadow to going retrograde, conjunction with the Sun, direct, and its post-shadow. And so this is one complete cycle from one exterior conjunction to the next with any Mercury retrograde cycle. Now, here's specifics for you in dates, what's happening in 2022, as I will show you in another slide coming up. The retrograde cycle is the first 3 this year, this being the 3rd one. They start in air, they go back to Earth. And so Mercury is in Virgo and Libra for about 3 months. As you can see here, 44 days Virgo, 42 days in Libra. When Mercury's on the opposite side of the sun and going direct and fast, it'll go through a sign of the zodiac as short as, 12 days or something like that. Very quick passages through each sign. It really slows down, as all planets do, when they have their retrograde cycles. Now, here's the chart for Mercury stationary direct, and you will see this chart repeated a few times tonight. What I do want to point out for you with my pointer here, as we shall look at in a little more detail, this Mercury retrograde has 3 oppositions to Jupiter. And the first 2 oppositions come at the beginning of this retrograde cycle. Mercury is left brain, Jupiter is right brain. And so when Mercury's retrograde, it automatically emphasizes surrendering to the right brain. And so this will be even more important with the specific retrograde cycle and the oppositions with Jupiter. Now, the fact that these oppositions are taking place with Mercury Libra and Jupiter early Aries in the beginning of its new 12-year cycle, this is an opportunity for renewing a balance of ourself with others. How do I want to evolve the relationship I have with myself? And then how do I want to evolve my relationship with others? Now, we'll go through the specific Mercury aspects, but I specifically wanted to point this one out because of the planetary pair of left brain, right brain we have with Mercury, Jupiter. The other thing that I'm going to point out periodically throughout this webinar is Mars has recently went into Gemini, and it's going to be in Gemini 7 months out of its 2-year cycle, because we are going to have a Mars retrograde in Gemini coming up. And throughout this whole Mercury retrograde cycle, Mercury ruling Gemini, Mars is making T-squares to these Virgo Pisces planets. And so when Mercury turns stationary retrograde, about 5-6 hours after it turns retrograde, we have the full moon of Pisces and Mars making a T-square to it. And as I looked at that, I thought, are we going to have compassionate actions with others, Mars and Gemini, or are we going to have wounded actions with others? I hurt you, you hurt me, I say mean things to you, you say mean things to me. That full moon of Pisces is about healthy boundaries, but it's also then, being the mutable archetypes here, really learning how to have some flexibility. And I think this is what this Mars retrograde cycle is going to bring for us throughout the rest of this fall and end of the year. When do we need to be open-minded and flexible? And when do we need to make a choice? And that's something that can come up with Mercury retrograde as well. You know, this works for me and this doesn't. And shedding old mental patterns and old mental behaviors, as we shall see going along. Now, every time I show you a Mercury chart, I then want to make it relative to the United States. And I thank international listeners for my US perspective. And for those of you who are not aware of this, somewhere in the last 1 to 2 years, I switched the chart I use for July 4th. I now go with the Michael Mancasey chart, which has a 9:37 a.m. Birth time for July 4th. It gives the U.S. a 12-degree Virgo rising, and it makes us a fifth house Pluto, the egotistical, exceptionalistic country that we call the USA. Here's the history of where it comes from, all right? It's pretty well established that the Second Continental Congress maintained a pretty consistent daily schedule for its years in existence, both before and after signing the Declaration of Independence. Well, in 1989, the Library of Congress released newly discovered letters of Benjamin Franklin, as well as others, with him saying he remembered signing the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, somewhere between 9 and 11 a.m. And so this just made a little more sense to me looking at this. When you have a Virgo rising, speaking of Mercury retrograde, we can have that instinctive distortions of criticizing others. It means that we want to instinctively learn how to be healthier and heal, and perhaps be more loving and giving, some of the positive traits of Virgo. And we have time periods as a country when we do that. But we also have those time periods where we kind of, you know, really get into this fifth house Pluto of egotism, and therefore make ourselves better than, less than Virgo, that inner outer criticism. And that leads us to blindly having relationships, Pisces, with other countries in which we ignore their faults, or we ignore their rights. We shift back and forth over long periods of time with who we relate to and who we don't relate to, just depending on what we get out of it. Fifth house Pluto. Now, regardless of which July 4th chart you use, there is a history of inclusive versus exclusive trends in our 246 years. This is emphasized by the Mercury oppositions to Pluto, the only two retrograde planets. It is emphasized by the Sun square to Saturn in Libra, and it is emphasized by the Mars in Gemini square to Neptune in Virgo. Again, the cycles of including versus excluding. We'll look at this Mars-Neptune square quite a bit with this Mercury retrograde cycle. Stay tuned. But here is Mercury retrograde on the Mancasey chart. And I want to point out a couple of things that are going to be true for any July 4th chart. The USA, for the first time in its country's history, is having its Pluto returns. That intense debate over our soul and ego in this country. You hear the words in the news like a constitutional crisis. You hear the republic versus autocratic. You hear all kinds of conversations going on, if you pay attention to this, about how we're having so many of our rules of law ignored or broken down, or even things with our Constitution, one Pluto return later, that are perhaps in need of revisiting. Stay tuned. we will see how it goes. I've said from the beginning of the year that this can be a wild ride, not just in 2022, but it could be this way last decade, this decade. The story hasn't been completely written yet. But I also want to point out that with this Mars retrograde cycle coming up in Gemini from 26 to 8 degrees, Mars is going to have 3 returns in the US chart. It's going to make 3 squares to that natal Neptune. And Neptune is just coming off of oppositions to itself and squares to that natal Mars. And so that split with our beliefs in this country, that split between what's a fact and what's an alternative fact, to use those phrases as they have been mentioned in the past. And so, again, are we going to wake up to some of this Virgo Piscean blindness and go, what is truth here? And so Mercury retrograde in Libra with this Mars in Gemini, we're going to have a little bit of debate around that over the next few months. But also, we're going to have, for the 9:37 a.m. time period, the moon ends up at 22.5 degrees Aquarius in the 6th house. And so transiting Saturn in Aquarius is in process of making 3 conjunctions to the moon. It's already had 2. It will have the 3rd one here coming up later this year. This starts to bring in, here's mom, here's dad, here's female, here's male, here's animus, here's anima. This starts to bring in all of these gender issues that we have seen since the Supreme Court handed down the Roe versus Dobbs, is that what it is? Whichever one it is. The fact that they took away 50 years of the female having a right to abortion and tossed it back to the states and really created a chaos. I think this Mercury retrograde in Libra and then back to Virgo, health and wellness, will continue to bring this into the news, keep it in the news as we go through these midterm elections. Wherever you stand on the issue, I think we can perhaps agree that, or be aware of the fact that we have, white male-dominated legislators and Supreme Court justices telling a female what she can and cannot do with her body. Don't get me started. I'll try and be a little neutral and detach myself for a while as we're talking. So we will visit this a little more as we go along here. But in addition to Mercury making oppositions in the sky to Jupiter, these start to come in and also activate this Venus in natal Jupiter in early Cancer here, which is another one of those, what's fair, Libra, what about me and my rights and independence, and of course all the traditional gender roles that tend to be so dominant in patriarchal distortions. Find a society in this world that does not have the patriarchal distortions of male dominance over females. Might be a little female anger going on throughout this Mercury retrograde cycle. Stay tuned. However, here's my slides that I tend to repeat. The only thing I want to point out is one more time. In 2022, the retrograde cycles go from air to earth, air to earth, air to earth. Starting 23, we will have retrograde cycles completely in the earth signs. So what happens when we go Mercury retrograde from air to earth is the thoughts and communications of air have to be turned into or settled into the practical realities of the physical world. Another way of saying this is getting to the essence of any messaging with direct words. You know, Mercury in Libra and retrograde in Libra sometimes just, talks until it's blue in the face instead of Aries polarity being direct and just stating it. So as we go through this Mercury retrograde, where can you take a deep breath and say, what is the essence of what I'm trying to get to in my communications? And Mercury retrograde, of course, yes, sometimes we still discuss it more than once to get to that essence and to get to that clarity. Now, planetary retrogrades are Earth-centered phenomena. It appears to go backwards from our perspective. It's an opportunity to break free from conditioning factors. If you were born with Mercury retrograde, you can have a temporary harmony or reprieve when Mercury is transiting retrograde. Again, if you are new to these webinars on Mercury, you can refer back to the PDF and these slides, and you can freeze things. You can, I think, print them out, whatever you need to do. Astronomy, Mercury is never more than 29 degrees away from the sun because of the perspective from Earth. So it's always in the sign before, the same sign as, or the sign after, whatever your sun sign is. Here's the visual of Mercury retrograde. If you watch it in the sky every single night, you can see pre-shadow, retrograde, post-shadow as it goes and travels the nighttime skies. Now, Mercury has rulership of two archetypes in the zodiac at this point in space-time. Mercury's rulership at Gemini in third is the outer side of Mercury because it is the active polarity, and Gemini is the air element. Mercury's rulership of Virgo in the sixth is the inner side of Mercury due to its passive polarity and it being in the element of Earth. So while Gemini and Virgo, third and sixth, can share some similarities, conscious mind, left brain, there's still two different archetypes, one energy moving out, the other energy moving in. Generally, when we go through a Mercury retrograde, it's about releasing excess thought. The mind is saturated, it's hard to process info and new ideas in life. It is a time to let go of old mental patterns. It's a time to go inward and to quiet our mind, to get clarity on best courses of actions. And of course, this one here, the left brain is pointing to right brain, Mercury, Jupiter. Ruler of Gemini points to Sagittarius, Jupiter. Ruler of Virgo points to Pisces and its ruler, Neptune. So Mercury retrogrades always naturally activate the mutable quadrant, Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces. So how do we find quiet time in the typical busyness of a Mercury retrograde overload? On one hand, we have to take care of the details. We have to pay attention to driving or our electronics, especially when we live in this technological world. We've got to discuss something more than once until we get it to clarity again. Sometimes we have to do things more than once. And that can be the time period where I like to say, we have to take the time to do it correctly, to do it the highest and best way, rather than, what shall we say, procrastinate going through our inbox one more time. Ooh, Mercury retrograde can be a good time to clear out that inbox. Now, This Mercury retrograde cycle is all about relationships. Both Virgo and Libra are relationship archetypes. They are that point between having a unequal relationship and learning to strive for equality in relationships. So this Mercury retrograde is going to bring up any and all of your relationships, your personal one-on-one, with your family, with your parents, with your kids, with your coworkers, all your relationships. Oh, and by the way, then it stretches out to all the collective relationships. What is ready for change? Now with Libra, one of the archetypes is that psychology of listening. How do we deeply listen both inwardly to our inner voice and outwardly to all of the other voices in our world? Virgo is the psychology of adjustment. So how do we change ourselves and be that change in the world that we wish to be able to see in the world? So let me go through a few slides here for you, specifically Mercury retrograde in Libra. Again, both inner and outer communications are emphasized. We must have a willingness to discuss any issue multiple times. That psychology of listening that we just spoke about, can we hear something from another's perspective and reality as it exists for them? And in the same respect, can others do that for us? And as we go through all those communications, can we hear our own inner voice and what is the truth for us? And of course, with Libra, it is an opportunity to learn new ways of communicating. How can we go back and forth with others? It can also bring about relationship beginnings and endings. If we're starting a new relationship, Mercury retrograde Libra, there has to be some discernment over just jumping in Aries polarity head first and then finding out afterwards that we have diametrically opposed beliefs, maybe political views. And so one of the things that I say is it's companionship first, then friendship, then intimacy. In companionship, activity more important than person. So we can explore and see if our beliefs and values are similar enough. Then when we move into friendship, person more important than activity. We can still explore those beliefs and values, but those two relatings create the foundation for intimacy. Best relationships in the world will have karma come up. And if we can fall back on companionship and friendship, then we're creating a healthier foundation to the relationship. This is really true for the Pluto and Libras. I say this little companionship, friendship, intimacy a lot with this Pluto and Libra generation, with people who come for just wanting to know something about relationships or wanting synastry and compatibility readings. If you're going for an exit, which means a relationship that's run its course, there's that little phrase, hellos are only as good as goodbyes. Can you part as friends? Which is what we do with natural law. Friends and lovers, Aquarius and Leo, are opposites on the zodiacal wheel. Can you move through the exit communications? Are there children involved? How are you going to deal with taking care of the children? Are there resources involved? How are you going to split any resources? And of course, if you are having a relationship that's run its course, there must be healthy boundaries whenever it's necessary. Because again, Mercury retrograde in Libra is pointing towards that balance of self and others. Because what we're looking at here is the potential for relationship evolution into greater equality. The vast majority of people in relationships are not going to split the sheets during this Mercury retrograde. Most relationships are going to have the evolution of the relationship in some way. So how are the roles in the relationship changing? How are they being defined? And of course, in this particular time period, Libra, Aries, Square, Cancer, Capricorn, as we mentioned before, that gender equality can really be gaining ground, especially right here in the US, as Pluto's late transit in Capricorn has been denying abortion and healthcare rights for women in various parts of the country. So, personally, collectively, here's how we're all going to be evolving through this. Now, we can have with Libra relating projections and expectations that will be revealed for greater understanding. So we can realize how we project something onto the partner rather than recognizing that it's our stuff. Partner can do the same to us. It can include these disappointments over unmet needs that then Aries polarity show us we have a responsibility to fulfill our own needs. And as I said before, the squares to Cancer Capricorn, it's going to bring up relationships in all kinds of ways where our work and familial communicating patterns coming up. Perhaps one of the biggest things, one of the biggest communication problems we have is that we do not listen to understand. The psychology of Libra, listening to understand. We have a tendency to listen to reply, the Aries polarity. Taking a breath. Okay, I hear you. Now, when Mercury retrogrades back into Virgo, here again, it can be detail overloads that we have to, sometimes we just have to address them. If something in our electronic or technological world isn't working, we've got to take the time with the Mercury retrograde Virgo details to handle it. But this archetype can also create confusion and indecision, doubt, procrastination, frustrations. How well can we breathe through it? How well can we do that, Virgo? One foot in front of the other to work our way through. We can have an ability here to really see what isn't working. That self-analysis of Virgo can intensify here. And what it comes down to is, do we address it through a crisis or through making methodical changes, one foot in front of the other? Because Virgo is an earth sign, when Mercury retrogrades back into Virgo, we can see issues with resources, money, and finances coming up. Stay tuned. We'll see how things go. Mercury's going to make 3 waning trines to Pluto in Capricorn, which does not want to let go of resource control and hoarding. And those trines can bring resource gains or losses depending upon our prior efforts and our karma. There are those who are starting to say that here in the United States, the Federal Reserve can only address the supply side of inflation. It raises interest rates to lower supply of money, less loans when it's higher interest rates. And there are those that are saying what we need to be working with is the demand side of the equation as well. We can't solve problems just through interest rates. Some of you might know that I've just been a proponent of public banking forever, publicbankinginstitute.org. Part of that is a growing movement for a national infrastructure bank, which we've had periodically throughout the history of our country, in which the government actually invests in supporting its people, supporting its infrastructure, our roads and our bridges, supports in taking care of us. Stay tuned. I think some of that's going to depend on how our midterm elections turn out as we look at things moving forward in that degree. But I think it's possible that Mercury's, retrograde cycle into Virgo, we'll see our feds just doing what they've always done, thinking that'll work, when there's been, some major examples in our past where it didn't work. What we will also see when Mercury retrogrades into Virgo is all of the sadomasochistic distortions being exposed. It's pretty easy to see we humans are imperfect beings, and that imperfection through religious conditioning factors leads to guilt. And we can have two responses. The atonement side of guilt, we're the victim. I deserve this. And so here's where Mercury needs to have those healthy boundaries and learn how to say no, and really put energy into loving ourselves regardless. There's nobody perfect on this planet right now. The other side of the reactions and responses to the guilt of a perfect God and perfect humans is the anger or victor pattern. And in this case, the Mercury retrograde may force us to make adjustments. In other words, we don't get to power over others. And we have to recognize that we have to calm down within ourselves and still self-love as well. So the atonement pattern, we have to find some courage. The anger pattern, the universe kind of comes at us and says, you don't get to have these kind of behaviors anymore. Because one of the distortions we'll see with Virgo is that inner outer criticism. So we tear down another person, we tear down another view, another belief in order to make ourselves feel better. And if we can work on that self-love, which is one of the deepest essences of Virgo, then we calm down both inner and outer criticisms. I don't know how many of you have caught this through Neptune's 14-year transit through Pisces, 2011 to 25-26. We continue, at least here in the United States, and I think many places elsewhere as over the world, the consensus religion and attendance is decreasing in this country. But we also have this perspective of evangelism that has become like a Trump cult. There are many in the evangelical religious world who have put Donald Trump on a pedestal, and whatever he says is gospel. Trump, by the way, has Neptune and Pisces squaring his Gemini Sag planets. It's just finishing up here in 2022, I think, with the squares to his sun. And so as we move into 23, 24, and we get past Neptune Pisces squaring his planets, hopefully we will start to see more people recognizing how we have turned him into, the de facto savior in all of these religious and factual distortions. We could see some of that in the news with Mercury retrograde into Virgo. Stay tuned. We'll see how that kind of plays out on that more public role. But here again, multiple communications until we can understand another person's perspective and point of view. And with Mercury retrograde in Virgo, there can sometimes be those necessary experiences of Virgo humiliation to move us towards the equality that Libra strives to create. In other words, Mercury retrograde in Virgo may be bursting some of our Leonian bubbles of self-importance. Virgo is about service, first of all to ourselves, but then to others, all the way out to Gaia, planet Earth, and all species. We may have a few health crises come through to reveal what needs to change for us in order to have some self-care or better self-care in our world. Healthy natural Virgo is gentle and self-loving and loving of others. Virgo 6 is the archetype that includes diet, exercise, and rest. Again, how we serve ourselves in the best ways possible. And because Virgo's Earth is going to be serving this temple of our soul called the body. Now, the Pisces polarity, making an effort to simplify our life and prioritize what is truly important. Finding that quiet time to actually hear what universal source is trying to say. Allowing that right brain to make sense of all of the details in our life. So it's quite possible that we may have a religious and or spiritual breakthrough. You know, everyone can feel stress. Everyone wants to be safe. You know, most of us want that inner outer peace. Can we allow everyone their freedom, Aries polarity, to find their path home, however they perceive it best for them? We also want to be interacting with nature here. Getting yourself outdoors, taking that walk, sitting by the lake, climbing the mountaintop, putting your feet in the grass, just breathing however you can. Yes, we have all the Virgo busyness, but in between that, can we just take time to slow down, to relax, to simply live life? Can we search for common language and emotional connections? You know, we'll see this with Mercury and Venus. It's you know, we can't do it all in our head. We also have to do it with our heart. And Pisces is water, it's emotions. And Pisces is the last of the 12 archetypes. So it really wants us to be able to recognize the collective relationship with all of us as a human species and with all of us in relationship and connected to planet Earth. And of course, religious distortions teach perfect God, imperfect humans. In natural law, is Pisces polarity wants us to know that the path to perfecting is through putting one foot in front of the other, making the Virgo effort again, however necessary. Now, the Aries polarity to when Mercury is retrograde in Libra, we have to maintain and evolve our sense of self through all and any relationship chaos and change. We can't have a relationship outside of ourselves unless we have one inside ourselves. So how do we balance time alone with others? How do we balance ourselves with others when we're in relationship? And this Mercury retrograde, especially the first part of it, can be push, pull, back and forth, back and forth. Oh, I need to go sit by myself for a moment. Oh, no, okay, I need to interact with someone. Can we follow that intuitive energy helping us go back and forth? It will also be an opportunity to release the distortions of, I kind of say power over, power under. That's kind of Scorpio words, but dominating and being dominated. If we are dominating, can we learn to give and share? If we are dominated, can we stand up for self? And that means learning to think and speak for ourselves through all communications. That Aries polarity wants us to take charge of our life in some new way and to initiate new mental patterns and then make that effort again, however necessary. All right, I'm going to repeat some slides again. In evolutionary astrology, we look at the cycle of phases and aspects from 0 to 360. And so Mercury is a lot more active with aspects than what we typically see in our astrology calendars. Here is the visual of the 8 phases and the cycle of aspects from 0 to 360. Original credit, Dane Rudier. Jeffrey adapted it. I adapted it a little more. So here are the aspects that Mercury is making. We can see here, always with Venus, the oppositions to Jupiter. Sesquisquadrates to Saturn and Uranus. More on that. Trines to Pluto. And aspects to the nodal axis. First of all, one more time. Here's Mercury retrograde dates and degrees. And the interior conjunction to the sun, which we will look at first. And so here is the chart for when Mercury retrograde reverses back over the sun, taking place at 0 degrees Libra. And you can see again how tight the Jupiter opposition is. It's within orb almost the entire Mercury retrograde cycle. The 0 degrees Libra points to initiating new relating opportunities or the distortions of the extreme oppositions. And of course, here in the US, we will most likely see this through our congressional midterms between Democrats and Republicans, heating things up. Who's going to say what? Who's going to speak the truth? And who's going to have an outrageous alternative fact or lie? Stay tuned. Remember I said that the Mars in Gemini will be active throughout this retrograde cycle? Well, when Mercury makes the interior conjunction to the Sun, opposing Jupiter, Venus comes into the picture in later Virgo, and it makes the opposition to Neptune with a tighter T-square from Mars in Gemini. What do we value on the deepest levels in relationships? This Mercury retrograde cycle emphasizes Venus by rulership of Libra, and it emphasizes Mercury by rulership of Virgo. Look at this interior conjunction. Here they are, mutually receptive in each other's sign of rulership. More on Venus in a moment here. But I just want to say, we look at the interior conjunction of Mercury to Sun as a halfway point of the retrograde cycle. It's the light bulbs, it's the ahas. So again, what do we value on deepest levels in relationships? And here, one more time, Mars is already in pre-shadow. It was before the Mercury retrograde cycle started, and it will continue to be so. Here is the interior conjunction with the chart I use for the USA. Here's the conjunction. See the tight squares to Venus in Cancer and Jupiter in Cancer, revealing, showing us an intense split in collective thought around our resources, Venus and Jupiter, and what we value. What we value with resources, what we value with relationships, that whole polarity and dichotomy of gender issues. I don't see it going away with this Mercury retrograde cycle. And what else is happening? Transiting Neptune is still within an orb of opposing itself and squaring the natal USA Mars. And look at how much closer Mars in Gemini is getting to the USA natal Mars. A religious divides that we have in all kinds of areas in this country. Mars is going to make three conjunctions to the natal US Mars in Gemini during this retrograde cycle. Here's the dates for you. When Mars will be at 21 degrees Gemini. It will make 3 squares to Neptune as well. Details on that in the Mars retrograde webinar coming up in October. So again, here you can start to see we have the Libra energy with the natal USA Cancer planets, and we have transiting Neptune and Mars activating everything. That interior conjunction, I said the Venus opposition to Neptune with the T-square to Mars, activating this natal position as well. All the include, exclude, all the gender inequality and equality issues that are going to be coming up. I'll speak to Saturn over the moon here, Mercury direct for you, okay? Don't need to be neglecting it, but I will point out all the way through this year, here's transiting Pluto to that natal Pluto just sitting on it. I'm going, okay, we're 2/3 of the way through the year. We've got 4 months to go. What other surprises will Pluto bring us? You can look for that to come maybe closer to December, January, when we have that third conjunction between them. They will be within orb through the rest of this decade as Pluto goes new phase, and then when it goes into Aquarius, then we will start to really see some of the changes that we want to create anew as this country rebirths itself. It's not written. Stay tuned. I have hope, but we have no guarantees. Now, I want to point out Mercury and Venus this time because Mercury will make 3 conjunctions to Venus throughout the rest of this year. And the reason it's going to have 3 conjunctions is because Venus, remember the Venus retrograde cycle in Capricorn, the end of last year? Well, Venus is getting ready to conjunct the Sun next month or fall at 29.5 degrees Libra. And it's traveling on the far side of the Sun. I don't know if it's in the underground world yet or not. I didn't look up that detail. But when Venus is direct, it'll go into the underworld, which means it's so close to the Sun, you can't see it. And it'll do that for, oh gosh, I think it's something like 2 months. Could be even a little bit longer. But this is when Mercury can make multiple conjunctions to Venus. I mean, it can do it other times, rarely if they're traveling real close together, but it always tends to be when Venus is on the far side of the Sun more than when Venus is retrograde and interior conjuncting to the Sun, meaning Venus between Earth and Sun. And so here's one the end of September, here is November. And I want to point out this one. Mercury's next retrograde cycle already. Mercury is going to have initiate one more retrograde cycle before the year is over on December 29th at 24:21 Capricorn, which is exactly the same day that it will conjunct Venus, which is exactly the same day that we will have the third transiting Pluto return to the natal US Pluto. Okay. Conscious mind Mercury values Venus. Mercury can get confused here with all these three conjunctions to Venus. We have to be quiet in order to understand what's important to us in regards to values, resources, and relationships. Here's the three conjunctions again. And so, what I wanted to point out one more time is the fact that that third conjunction is going to take place with the third USA Pluto return and Mercury stationary retrograde. I get the feeling that no matter how the midterm election results turn out, there's going to be all kinds of chaos. There'll be those states that have really went Trumpian with election deniers and trying to take over, the local elections, the Secretary of State positions, and just going into denial of everything, no matter what, in order to have last gasp Pluto Capricorn control. We're going to see a mixture of progress and regress from state to state. In other words, will we see a bigger split between blue and red states? What states will turn purple, as they call that mixture with red and blue? Stay tuned. Again, Mercury and Venus are going to be pretty active together this fall. How will it be evolving our values? Here is the chart. I just wanted to stick this in for you one more time because on showing you on this date with the third Pluto return, here's how close Venus, Mercury, Pluto are, making the conjunctions not only to Pluto, but Mercury and Venus literally opposing the natal US Mercury. I think the end of this year, one more time, is going to be fairly active for us. And I thought, just in case you wanted to have a refresher, we're now being able to reflect a little on Pluto being past the Mercury oppositions and all of the election denial effects that have went on. We are moving past the Neptune last quarter squares to Mars, the Neptune oppositions to itself. And they're still tight, they're still close orbs. It's probably going to take another year or even two to see the deeper meanings of these Pluto and Neptune aspects that have been so dynamic in the chart of this country. Mercury retrograde can be a time period where something breaks through. Something shifts. Stay tuned. We'll see what the events are that create that. One more time, here are the dates that Mercury opposes Jupiter. Mercury goes retrograde on the 9th. As you can see here, it's pretty tight orb with Jupiter. And because Jupiter's in the midst of finishing up, Jupiter retrogrades all the way back into Pisces before it goes direct and then goes into Aries again. We have the ending and beginning of Jupiterian cycles that really want us to broaden larger understandings. Mercury's work is to ground it, to make it real. And so, will we have the continuing intensity of opposing ideas and relationships? Or will we take the opportunity of oppositions to throw off what no longer makes sense in our world? This is the intent of what these aspects mean. We're all going to live through it. We don't know. I think we might be starting to see that pendulum swing, and people going at least perhaps an inching majority that will grow and saying, I'm getting tired of these election deniers, getting tired of these people who are threatening the stability of our country. And so these Mercury-Jupiter oppositions, even in Libra Aries, again, squaring those Cancer planets, they're showing us where all three of our branches of government are needing to evolve. This is a slide from my 2022 forecasting webinar, which I was looking at, and I'm like, oh boy, I didn't know that would turn out to be so good. And there are a few slides in there that, came through for this year. And the things that we have to sometimes change within this country. We'll be looking at all of these as we move through the rest of this decade. But again, what I wanted to point out is the Mercury-Jupiter oppositions can really be bringing it up into consciousness. Just how, one more time, dangerous the Trump Republican Party is for this country. Now, I also want to show you this chart for October 13th. Mercury goes direct October 2nd at 24 Virgo. But I wanted to give you a visual with Saturn and Uranus and Mercury. And so what will happen over the course of this fall is Saturn is going to get less than a degree from its opposition to Uranus. And these are the last quarter square, not opposition, last quarter squares, the crises in consciousness. And you can do this whenever you see two planets square each other. Go look on the opposite point of the chart and see if there's a planet over there making the sesquiquadrates, the square and a half. And here's Mercury making it to Saturn. Here's Mercury making it, Uranus and Saturn. And so these square and a halves, they're going to be like squares. They're just as active. It's energy going from outer to inner. And so that tension is still there because it wants to release, but it's being asked to go inward. And here's Mercury retrograde through this, asking us to go inward with our thoughts and how we are thinking. So I think that means that tension is still going to run high between progressive and regressive thoughts and ideas, and the whole truth versus lie theme, and the intent is to evolve our relationships to new understandings. We can do this personally, one-on-one, and we can do it collectively with our groups as well. So here's the 3 days that Mercury makes waning sesquiquadrates to Saturn, which is entering into disseminating phase. And this phase is learning how the collective works. And I put collective societies, but it can be a collective group in your pod at work. It can be a collective group with your family dealing with some type of situation together. It's, wherever two or more are gathered. but it's learning how any collective group works in order to participate more fully, to share things, to share knowledge more fully. Think about that from the perspective of a Mercury retrograde. Now, these sesquisquadrates take place with Mercury in Libra, Saturn in Aquarius, both air signs. Doesn't mean we're going to get to better understandings. It can increase the polarities of opinion, alternate realities, the extreme differences between Democrats and Republicans can be brought into sharp relief as we're going through this fall and getting ready for the midterm elections. I will also say that with our relationships, it's very possible that it needs more multiple communications to get to some area of that Libran balance, to hopefully reach some Aquarian objectivities as we have all of these communications and relationships trying to understand a larger picture. Now, Mercury makes waxing sesquisquadrates to Uranus going into the gibbous phase. And this is about shifting from a subjective egoic consciousness to understanding broader concepts and perspectives, meaning going from ourself to learning how to understand a perspective of another. And it just so happens that here, Libra and Taurus are both signs ruled by Venus. Oh, did I say we were going to deal with relationships as Mercury retrograde? Yep, here we go again. And so it can also, though, bring in some resource issues that we have to work through differences and hopefully come to some kind of Libran balance that's more fair and equal. It also may show us an intent to simplify those Venetian values and really honor relating with others over maybe resource accumulations. And of course, I can't talk about Uranus and Taurus without thinking climate change. I haven't mentioned a lot about this, but the catalysts of Mercury making these sesquisquadrates to the Saturn-Uranus squares, there can be more Earth events. And can it shake up any numbness or apathy that's going on in feeling powerless and help us into empowering of what each and every one of us can do day in, day out, Mercury. And then Mercury makes these waning trines that I spoke about earlier with Pluto. Both of these in the Earth signs. When it's a waning trine, it's outer rewards and losses. And being double Earth, there can be resource rewards or losses based upon prior efforts. The trines bring reward, but we must have made prior efforts in order to energize that harmony of the trine. Mercury retrograding in Virgo here must watch a tendency, being critical of others. Can we help those that are less fortunate? Again, the end of the Pluto in Capricorn, the haves and the have-nots. Power grabs can take place with our resources because the patriarchal distortions fear what is coming. They fear that energies, like for instance here in the US, that's rising up where we're saying, wait a minute, can we have some caps on the price of drugs? The $35 cap with Medicare on insulin. We in the US on Medicare who take insulin are still paying 3 times as much as they pay in Canada. Oh, by the way, we, want to have more equal distribution of this or that. you know, Mercury waning Pluto, there can be some underhanded attempts going on to maintain any wealth inequalities. I think one thing that might happen is there is going to be even more recognition in the US how men overpower women and those voting and autonomy rights for women. You know, I've been reading some articles about how in various states the women registering to vote are outpacing men anywhere from 5 to 40%. 40% was the extreme. That was in Kansas, where they specifically had an abortion issue on the ballot. And in that state, women registered to vote 40% more than men. And we're seeing this all over the country. Now, South Node is a waning semi-square. South Node in Scorpio here. Waning semi-square to Mercury, the power over, power under issues that can be intensifying. Semi-squares are half a square, still that tension. The North Node in Taurus is waxing sesquisquadrates. And so that tension to be able to Taurus have the self-reliance and autonomy to take care of our own issues. Taurus is self-sex, Scorpio is shared sex. Isn't it interesting that our Supreme Court takes away a woman's right to have control over her body from a sexual act? Taurus, Scorpio. South Node in Scorpio, I think there's a lot of women being pissed off, going, I may not want it for myself, but why would I take away the right of a 10-year-old to not have an abortion from rape? Why would I want to force there was another recent one, a court ruled that a 16-year-old wasn't old enough to make a decision on whether or not to terminate a pregnancy. Well, who says she's old enough to carry the pregnancy to term and raise a baby? I think you get the point. Probably don't have to preach to the choir. But this Mercury retrograde interacting with the nodal axis, these sexuality issues are not going to go away. And I think it will be, you know, pretty obvious for women going, I don't care if I agree with abortion or not. I don't think you should be able to tell me what to do with my own body. Men, how many of you would like women to say, oh, sorry, you don't need that thing between your legs anymore. We're just going to take it off. Sorry, being facetious here. Here's Mercury stationary direct on October 2nd at 24 Virgo. Now Mercury gets involved with a pretty tight opposition to Neptune as it turns stationary direct. Oh, did we talk about Mars yet in Gemini making T-squares through all of these Mercury charts? I won't preach to the choir. You can probably get the messages going on. I do wonder, as Mars is getting closer to its stationary retrograde point, the end of October, how many sleight of hands and lies will still be part of the consensus landscape. And of course, as Mercury goes direct, we have Venus making the opposition to Jupiter with the Sun involved and squaring the USA planet. Here's Venus and Mercury still receptive in each other's signs. Here's the Munchausen chart for 9:37 a.m. And here's the Venus Sun oppositions to Jupiter to the USA chart. Here's the Mercury direct opposition to Neptune. Oh, oops, up here. Square to Mars. See how it's activating this natal one. And just a few hours before that, the moon was in Sag having a grand cross. I have not spoke about the fact that in the Munchausen July 4th chart, it is in 2022 that transiting Saturn makes 3 conjunctions to the US moon. In a mundane or collective chart, the moon represents the public. It doesn't mean just the female public. It means the public in general and emotional public opinions in general. So, of course, distortions of Aquarius would be the inequalities, the duality of the air signs, and, the upper class elites with everybody else. But I also think with transiting Saturn going over the USA moon 3 times, it's lending itself to Aquarian objectivity with feminine topics. And it also is part of the midterm debates around the gender issues. Sorry to sound like I'm preaching to the choir, but this retrograde cycle around relationships, including Virgo with health and wellness, and then all the aspects we have in these July 4th charts, is really bringing up all of these issues around gender equalities. And I just do not think women are going to silently sit by and go, oh, okay, yeah, let's just roll back my rights 50 years. I briefly just wanted to put in Joe Biden's chart and skip ahead to the lunar eclipse. The eclipse season does not get active in this Mercury retrograde cycle, but I thought as we've talked about these midterm elections and relationships and the gender issues, it is the South Node lunar eclipse on November 8th, which is the USA election day. That it's still pretty active on Biden's chart. The nodal axis is right on his Mars. We have Mercury having moved direct to make almost a conjunction with the sun on this lunar eclipse, with Saturn still in a T-square to everything. Stay tuned. Sometimes you look at the president as where the country will go. I look at this, Uranus moon north node conjunction and going, women saying, I'm taking back my rights to my own body. And we may not see it explicitly showing up in midterm elections, but it will be there. It will be part of the conversation. And it will be one of the things that are making a difference. Most of the year, your political pundits have just been going, oh, the Republic or the Democrats are just going to get so slaughtered. And I've just been saying all year long, we got the Pluto returns. There are surprises to show up. There may be more surprises before November 8th. I don't necessarily see the Democrats getting slaughtered. It's my hope and intent that they keep the Senate and increase the Senate. Stay tuned. We shall see. So winding down, I always like to finish with a few Questions. How am I learning to relate to myself better? How am I changing my relationships with others? How well can I deeply listen, inwardly and outwardly? Where do I need to find my voice? How do I balance giving and receiving? How do I take better care of myself? Diet, exercise, and rest. Where do I need to replace criticism with understanding? How do I nurture myself and others in healthy ways? How can I better relate to all species on planet Earth? All right, everyone, here are the next 3 Mercury retrograde cycles. And our next Mercury retrograde webinar will be the end of the year, December 28th. As you see on your screen, you can see again, in 2023, the retrograde cycles will all be in Earth. We'll be talking a lot about resources, money, inflation, and those types of things as we go forward with these retrograde cycles. Here's the date for the Mars retrograde class in Gemini. And here's the date for my annual forecast for 2023. Any questions or comments? The last thing that I do is give you a list in chronological order of all of the aspects I have mentioned on these PowerPoint slides. And here is the final page of the Mercury aspects. Comments or questions on anything?
Looks like you did a pretty good job. No comments from the board.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in. I hope that your summer has went very well for you. Enjoy this last month of it, at least for those of us in the Northern Hemisphere. I noticed the shorter days, loving the cooler nights, but I want to slow down summer and fall. All right, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. All the best.